Wow, that is some clear water. I wonder from where this water originates. Hello folks. It's a beautiful day, not too cold, not too hot, it's the perfect temperature. That's to be expected in today's location. Now that clear water comes from a very, very clean, pristine source, the glaciated waters of a mountain, the prime mountain in this region. Now, as you can see here from all the diverse, lush wildlife, it takes a lot of water to sustain this ecosystem. Yeah, it takes a certain quality of water as well. Now, in Greek mythology, there were many, many famous regions, each with their own tales and stories. None may have been more famous than Mount Olympus, the towering mountain. That is a real mountain in Greece. And at the top of it, legend has it that gods and goddesses and deities would hang out there, I guess. That was where their home was. And they would look from the summit of these mountains down to the rest of the locations. Well, it turns out that America has its own Mount Olympus. Yes, they ripped off the name from ancient Greek mythology. But that's okay. I think this Mount Olympus is noteworthy in itself for being very, very legendary, if you will. We'll use the term literally. Now we're walking through one of the largest patches of old-growth forest in the lower 48 states. This is an ancient primeval forest, luckily preserved for us travelers today to bear witness to the natural beauty. This is technically a rainforest, not a tropical rainforest, but it's a temperate rainforest. And you can see with all the moss and excess green around us, more so than the typical forest. And you can see this is nothing ordinary. This is in fact legendary. So as we begin our first of 2 days here at our newest national park covered, I want to just introduce to you all this beautiful biome that you can't really see in most other places in the world. It's kind of a rarity, but believe me, this is only one of several ecosystems, biomes that you'll find here at this national park. So welcome to Olympic National Park. Now what we're looking at is one small section of the Hoh Rainforest. H-O-H it's spelled. And this might be one of the great highlights of your day here at Olympic National Park. And what's important to know here at the Hall of Mosses, that's this little section, is that this is not just the entire park. There are many, so many different biomes and ecosystems at the different sections that you'll visit. Maybe the east is going to be a little more dry than this lush, rainy west. It's a lucky day that it's not really raining right now. But at different elevations as well, you can find different temperature and climatic differences. I'm sure it's a lot colder up at the peaks of Mount Olympus than down here. We're only a bit above 500 feet above sea level. But it's not hard to notice just how wild and untame everything is. Branches scattered all over the place with moss hanging down from it, wild ferns and plants occupying the floor of this rainforest. Yeah, this is truly something you could find straight out of the Jurassic period, when the world was much more full of carbon dioxide and oxygen, that causing these huge plants to proliferate all across the world. But we no longer live in that era, so plants and animals are going to be a lot smaller. But that doesn't mean that with time, thousands of years of growth, undisturbed, that it could look just like it was back in the day, millions of years ago. Some of these giant flourishing trees can live up to 1,500 years. It's quite incredible. Yeah, you heard me. Maybe not all of these trees in front of us look as old as maybe this one, but it's not too uncommon for these trees to live hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years old. Yeah, those are the survivors. A lot of this land was cut down, but thankfully, as of more than 100 years ago, preservation efforts were made to keep this old and sacred land kept out of the hands of the logging industry. And now what we have today is this beautiful assortment of huge trees, shrubs, ferns, other plants, and of course, the animals are all hidden away. It's not like a zoo. This is going to be as wild as it gets for their natural habitat. So we'll be lucky if we find an animal or two, but they're all over the place here. Now, I hope my little bit over the course of the first minute or two served as a welcome introduction to Olympic National Park. But if you want some greater, more significant news to our collective adventures, well, let me tell you, this is our first destination in our 47th state. Can you believe it? Only 3 left. This is Washington, not DC, but Washington State, the Evergreen State. Anyway, this beautiful rainforest is telling me to stop talking and just show you on film the wonder that the Hall of Mosses brings to us. I'm sorry, I really, really love the view that this little creekside offers us. Beautifully clear waters. And it's all swampy and, oh, I just love it. On to the next thing, which is going to be a long distance away. Okay, I took a detour. This is the Hoh River. Notice how fast these water's rapids are. Must be a pretty steep course from the top of Mount Olympus. And then also, I guess the hue of the river, it's almost bluish. Could that be from the glaciation? The waters must be very, very frigid. Okay, time to drive like an hour to our next stop. Yeah, if you didn't notice at this point, this park is huge. Olympic National Park sits right in the center of the Olympic Peninsula of Washington, but it encompasses a sizable portion. Now, of the entire park's territory, it's divided into several different regions because much of the park is just pure wilderness. A lot of the park doesn't have access if you're driving in an automobile or other vehicle. But hey, there's an extensive system of interior pedestrian hiking trails, if you're up for that, if you're up for those multi-day hikes through the interior, the vast wilderness. And for that reason, you could spend days and days here, up to a week and a half, and barely scratch the surface of Olympic National Park. The access that you would have if you were on the road is just a few auto roads, auto trails, poking through, puncturing the borders of the territory at all sides. And from there, you would have access if you somehow got dropped off here and then decided to spend days more on foot. Oh, check this out. Big, big drops. Yeah, another glacier-fed river. That's the Solduck River, and that's probably what gives this region the name, the Solduck region. Just as beautiful as the Hoh Rainforest in its own way. Lots of moss on the floor. You can't see much of the ground dirt because it's covered in vegetation all around us. Really gives it that atmosphere of a real rugged adventure you're going through. We're seeing so many of these ancient trees, ancient groves. Oh, if only they could speak in our languages, but they're trees, so they can't. You start to become desensitized traveling through the Pacific Northwest and seeing these trees of humongous size. Yeah, I gotta figure out how to not be desensitized and say, wow, and just stop here and gaze in awe. It truly is very easy to just pass these by, saying, oh, well, I've seen a bunch of these big trees. No, you don't see any of these sized trees on the east, no way. Take a look at that, simply breathtaking. It's these waters from the mountains and glaciers, which truly are the lifeline of the plants and animals here. Through the waters that go and drain through rivers and creeks, it supplements the necessary water for the surrounding ecosystem. So you could think of these rivers that start in the center of Mount Olympus and go outside through the boundaries of the park as somewhat of a circulatory system for the Olympic Peninsula. Well, this just pops out right in front of you, off the trail a little bit. You'd think someone's growing a vegetable garden. Oh. Wow. All these mosses and large trees. It's all such a heavenly view. Maybe this area was blessed by America's version of the gods at the top of Mount Olympus. Wow, you can really tell here. I guess Olympic National Park is just another example of how here in the Pacific Northwest these trees are massive. No wonder there was such an expansive and intensive lumber industry that really endangered not just one but all of these national parks, state parks around this region of the country. Well, I mean before these places were codified into conservation under the status of these parks. Well, before these national parks and state parks, it was just wilderness that was possibly privately owned by different logging companies who held the private titles to these lands. And by the turn of the 20th century, the timber industry was in full swing. These trees would have been much larger if the trees that were once here had not been cut down by all these companies. And so as people began to notice the mountainsides of Mount Olympus being cut down, shaven, public outcry began to develop for the preservation of these lands. Because without the trees, well, it would have taken much, much longer for these forests to recover, if they could recover at all. The voices all across the Olympic Peninsula who were shouting at the national government to do something about it, finally found some reward to reap. In 1908, this was turned into Mount Olympus National Monument. In that year, Teddy Roosevelt, the man, not the myth, we know about him. We actually dedicated a whole video in North Dakota to the guy. The legend was president at the time, and he decreed that these lands and these forests shall be protected in the form of that national monument. 30 years later, Teddy's fifth cousin was also president, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and he upgraded the status of Mount Olympus National Monument to Olympic National Park. That was the year 1938, and ever since, these lands can feel safe to know that the trees won't be cut down, the ferns won't be cleared. No, this is protected land for us all to enjoy. Wow, how breathtaking. This is Lake Crescent. It's the largest lake within Olympic National Park, and wouldn't you know, it takes the shape of a crescent. And it goes on for much longer. For miles and miles, this reigns over the surrounding northern territory of the park. Once again, it's easy to spot all over this park how clear the water is. The composition here, so fresh, free of any sort of dirt or chemicals you'd see closer to the cities. And truly, it's the water that defines and creates and invites the ecosystems that are so diverse that you can find in this park. Not just the spruce and hemlock forests that are commonly seen at the floor, at the lowlands, but as you go up in elevation, you might encounter various subalpine meadows, and then at the very top, the ice caps, the peaks. And that's where Mount Olympus stands, watching over its surrounding domain. Oh yeah, plenty of beautiful sights, no matter where you go in this park. I think I've gotten to a better point along Lake Crescent, just a short walk away. And look at it, it's so blue. The waters are so plentiful. It's like a hidden beach in the middle of the forests. Oh, terrific. This point was once a major trading point for many various native groups. They would come to this point and trade the items that were either local or from far away. Maybe there was a long distance that separated 2 or 3 different tribes, and this was a nice midpoint. You know, I would too like to walk out of a local market or a shop or wherever I'm buying things and come to a view like this. Sure beats a parking lot. Now the thing is, for as tall as Mount Olympus is, it's only a little under 8,000 feet. That's pretty tall when we're right by the coast. Sadly, it takes at least a day's hike just to be able to reach it and see it with a great view. So for right now, I'm just gonna pretend that's Mount Olympus up there. It's clearly not, but that's probably the highest peak we see, at least in our immediate surroundings, and what we will be seeing today. Yeah, we'll definitely have to return someday in the far future back to Olympic National Park and really be ready for that day-long hike. Because, yeah, you really have to go pretty interior, pretty much in the center of the wilderness just to be able to see it. So, sadly, no Mount Olympus. I know the gods of Mount Olympus towering somewhere up there are going to be displeased at us, but whatever. Since we're not really diving deep into the interior or making a long trek, just for reasons of closure, I think it's right that we paste a photo of the real Mount Olympus right there. Yeah, it looks pretty. Looks very nice. Maybe one day we'll ascend it, but not now. Keep in mind, this is the Mount Olympus of Washington State, not the Mount Olympus of Greece, not the original Mount Olympus. All right, well, I think it's time to head even more east into the countryside for a final bit. Wow, how cool. We are at the Pacific Ocean once again. Well, I'm just kidding. We're actually kind of in the Pacific Ocean. Its waters will eventually lead out that way on the other side of the Olympic Peninsula. That whole stretch is the Olympic Peninsula, and we've sort of skirted eastward throughout the day up to this point. Dungeness Spit, part of Dungeness National Wildlife Reserve. Not quite a national park or a National Park Service affiliated unit, but it is a federally protected site, part of the National Fish and Wildlife Service, I believe. And it is this spit on which we are walking that is one of the world's largest sand spits. It's an impressive feature of the Pacific Northwest's geography. Now, this body of water is the Strait of Juan de Fuca. And on the other side of that massive body of water, you can see a faint silhouette of foreign land. That's right, that is not the US, that is Canada. Yeah, at the beginning of our travels on the Best of the Most West tour, we went so far west you couldn't reach further west because that was the Pacific Ocean. But then we moved up in the past few weeks, north, more north, even more north, until we can't find anything more north than this, because there's also water here. This Strait of Juan de Fuca is only part and parcel of the greater Salish Sea, which pretty much borders most of northwest Washington. It also borders Canada, the province of British Columbia, and I think that may just be Vancouver Island, the long island off the coast of the mainland of Canada. Wow, I'm really getting into the weeds here on geographic facts. Let me stick to where we are and what's relevant to the narrative of this video today. So this area, the Dungeness National Wildlife Refuge, is where the forests of Washington meet the ocean. So this is the end of the forest. It's also the point at which we end our travels for today, day one. Oh yeah, for much of today we explored what was sort of on the interior of Olympic National Park, and tomorrow we're going to be exploring the coastal areas within the park boundaries. Believe me, it's still just as beautiful on the coast as it is on the inland forests. Let me just once again emphasize, this was what we explored of the accessible interior of Olympic National Park. You can go for days on end. You could go missing in this large, expansive forest. How's that for a debut to the Evergreen State? Seeing some great evergreens. Washington, state number 47. What comes to mind? There's a lot that comes to mind in Washington State. And no, we're not talking about Washington, D.C., the capital district. Completely on the other side of the country. And Washington State is a lot larger in area than D.C. ever could be. The first thing I always think of with Washington State is, wait a minute, there's a state named after a president? That's right, George Washington, our first president from 1789 to 1797. He ruled, well no, he didn't rule. He presided, that's where we get the word president, over America for 8 long years, establishing the norm for how leadership in this country is carried out. Washington State is named after the guy, so is DC, but we're sticking with Washington State for right now. You might also think of the climate here. It's very mild, but it's also very, very rainy. This is the rainiest part of America. Lots of rains, which I'll explain tomorrow, but I'm very, very surprised that neither today nor forecasted for tomorrow is it going to be much rain. One could also think of the diverse landscapes within the state's boundaries. Sure, there's plenty of forest and coast to go around, but this place is also known for its assortment of mountains, of course, Mount Olympus somewhere in the distance, highlands and plateaus, and even deserts in the southeast. You could even say that Olympic National Park is a microcosm of Washington State as a whole with its diverse set of ecosystems. You might think of Washington as a state where lots of companies, specifically tech companies, are based in, such as Microsoft or Amazon. Honestly, it's kind of a little bit of an exclave of Silicon Valley down in California. I guess they sort of brought up a little portion of it up to Washington. Most states around the US have substantial amounts of farmland, and their climate's just right to be able to grow and cultivate a certain type of crop, and each state has its own signature fruit or food item that everyone in America knows that state for. For Washington, the climate's just right for growing apples. That's right, apples are a big thing in the agricultural regions of Washington. Finally, everyone knows the big coffee chain Starbucks, which was founded in Washington. What do you guys think of Washington State for? What comes to mind? Regardless, I'm glad we chose Olympic National Park to begin our journeys in the Evergreen State. And I know right now we're in a national wildlife refuge. We're not in the national park proper, but I felt this was probably the best view. Oh geez, that was a rock. Gotta be careful when walking backwards. That's why I usually walk forwards. But anyway, I figured this was the best view one could get at the top of the Olympic Peninsula. Oh yeah. I don't think Olympic National Park has much territory at the northern borders of these lands. No. It seems like after a hard day's work of adventuring, walking, talking, enjoying ourselves here, we end our day, and as a reward, I've won myself a 2-hour grand trip back west on US 101, only with the low payment of $40 in gas money. That's right, yeah, it's expensive down here. And my precious patience, but it's all good. I think this was worth the money and the time spent. This is a big, big national park. It's a big, big chunk of land, the Olympic Peninsula, but I think it's definitely on that Washington State bucket list. I think anybody who visits Washington State, you gotta come here. We'll have another day of adventures planned as we explore the coast far beyond those mountains and see what that's like. Finally, I just gotta say, Olympic National Park has nothing to do with the Olympics. Yeah, you won't see any athletic competitions here. It's named for Mount Olympus, not any games or sports, no. But there we go, that's all I have to say. It's time to end the video because I got a long drive ahead of me. So with that said, looking at the beautiful views of the mountains in the distance of the Olympic Peninsula and the Strait of Juan de Fuca. Excited for our second day in this beautiful national park. More travels to come. I will see you at the next location.